Hey guys, here we are with another Haunted Tales for this evening. Hope you enjoy it. We got a little bit of everything from Wendigos, breaking and entering, to cautionary tales about Ouija boards, to regular ghost stories, to people almost getting kidnapped. So we got a huge variety. There's lots of stories. There's smaller stories this time, but I think that they're all really good stories. So I hope you enjoy tonight. We only got about a couple minutes before the show starts. If you have it, I get about 2,000 people that view. If you're not a member yet, make sure you're hopping over to the group members page and becoming a member. That's when you know all the new happenings with the podcast. And I try to post over there about the Rift Network and what's going on there with their other channels and hosts. And anything of interest that pops up in the paranormal world, I kind of try to send it over there. Also, about over 50% of you guys that hop over to the YouTube channel, that you're not subscribed. So if you hit that subscribe button, it could really help me out. I really want to get a new computer so I can post more videos like that. My son was doing a lot of the editing for me, but now that school starts, he's taking a lot of honors and college classes, so he really hasn't had the time to put forth to the editing. So I'd like to be able to do it myself, but I just don't have a fast enough computer to do it. So it's kind of been put on a standby. I will still keep posting the live every week. So if you miss it or your friends miss it, you can always direct them to the YouTube channel, because I know it's a little easier to find than the actual podcast network link. I did include the link if you want to copy it or share it. I am going to be sharing out the podcast to the different groups. But Facebook, I don't want to go to Facebook jail. And they do limit how many groups I can actually share to. So if you're a member of a group, please share it out. That way everybody knows about the podcast. So, our viewership goes up. So, let me check the time. All right, we should be getting ready to start. So let me check on that, and I will be right back with you. And like always, I'm going to be here if you want to chat and comment with me. I just don't want to talk over the stories, so.
From everyone here at the Rift Radio Network, would like to welcome you to tonight's special broadcast. This work is protected by Creative Commons license. And now, a word from our sponsors. The Skeleton Key, this mystical shop found exclusively on Facebook, is stationed in Blossom, Texas. Purchase all of your very own unique religious, spiritual, and metaphysical items, to include the beginner altar kits. Find them today on Facebook. Remember, you've always had the key.
Beyond Earth Healing, your source for alternative and holistic full healing services by Reverend Kayla Ray. Beyond Earth Healing offers various approaches to energy healing to match your healing needs. She is led by her guides, angels, and more to help you heal. Located out of Lockport, New York, you may contact her at 716-550-3881 or at www.beyondearthhealing.com.
Welcome to the Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. And now your host, Christina Spencer.
Well, hello there. Come on in and get cozy by the fireplace. Let me get settled into my old rocking chair and I'll tell you a couple stories. Haunting stories. Stories that are not for the faint of heart. Some of these stories may not be about hauntings per se, but nonetheless will haunt you. Because after all, some of the most scary things in life are not ghosts and demons, but the people we cross on the street. If you're brave enough, keep listening. If not, get up and leave now, because you'll never be the same. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the Haunting Stories from the Old Rocking Chair. True Night Watchman Experience. Written by DarkRayvyn. I'll admit first off that I've heard of a lot of these deep web, dark web stories, and I've always called bullshit. However, a close friend of mine swore that she had been to these places and that she'd seen some really messed up things. Some she would talk about, others she refused. She said some of these things she had seen would haunt her for the rest of her life. I should have just let it go at that, but I wanted to believe that she was making it all up, and that there was no such place. But I was the one that was wrong. You know the drill by now. I downloaded Tor, Onion, and found the hidden wiki. I had been warned about some of the links and how they can trick you into some really crazy and horrible things. I clicked a few. They were mostly sex meetups, escort requests, and drug deals. Needless to say, I was really starting to think I was right and that the deep web was just an easy way to make shady deals that couldn't be traced. It was lame, tame, and a little boring. I looked around for something remotely interesting until I found the link, The Night Watchman. Okay, this could be interesting. I was thinking it might be some guy telling creepy stories or walking around a sleepy town at night or something. What greeted me was a flat, black page with 3 videos blown up to cover the space, sitting side by side in a line. They were paused. On each one of them was a picture of different people. The first one had a family of 4, a mom, a dad, and 2 little girls. The second was a couple, with the female being very obviously pregnant. The third was just one woman and her dog, a cute black lab with a white streak over its left eye. Before I could study them for too long, a voice came through. It was a male, but slightly distorted, so I couldn't really hear what he actually sounded like. Here's what he said. Good evening. Tonight, the Night Watchmen have brought you 3 unique households. Each of them lives different lives, believes different things, and has different future plans. He stopped here and cleared his throat. For this next part, it sounded like he was smiling. Watch each video and then choose one. I really didn't understand the point of the task, but honestly, my interest was piqued. I was curious about where this was going. I clicked the first video. There wasn't much to it. It just showed a family in their home, skipping through moments of them watching TV, playing in the backyard, having supper, the parents putting the kids to bed, starting to make love. It cut off there. Thank God. I was starting to feel like a weird creep. I was seeing part of people's lives that were meant only for them. I reluctantly clicked the next video. I was transported into a home of the young couples getting ready to start a family. It skipped through to them in the baby's room hugging and generally looking excited. They ate salads at the kitchen table, went through the mail, looked through the baby books and magazines, watched a show on TV, and then went to bed, snuggling up together. This was so sweet, I couldn't help but smile at what I'd seen. However, I was still a voyeur in their personal moments. I had gone through the others. I just figured it was only right to watch the last one. This one was of a single woman living with just her dog. She was a bit of a slob. She had dishes piled up, laundry on the love seat in the living room, and trash that was overflowing. The other 2 had been pretty tidy. The family having some toys and laundry lying around. I wondered if there was a point to that, since it did show these aspects in the videos. Anyway, the woman seemed lonely. She watched a lot of TV, ate a half-gallon of ice cream, checked her cell phone every few minutes, obviously hoping for a call or a text, played fetch with her dog, fed him, then went to bed, taking her phone with her. She began to masturbate, and I began to feel incredibly awkward. Thankfully, this one ended there as well. I waited to see what was next. The video resets and went back to the stills of each one again. The voice came back over and said, "Now that you've seen, which one will you choose?" I sat there and watched, praying that someone else was there watching too and would choose, but nothing happened for a few minutes. The videos disappeared and another 3 videos began to play simultaneously. These turned my stomach. There were 3 tall men. I assumed they were all men by what character I could catch. They each wore the same clothing. Black shirt, pants, boots, and a long black trench coat that dangled around their ankles. To top it all off, they each wore a large, wide-brimmed black hat. Have you decided? Which one will you choose? The voice chimed in over the obvious live feed. Death comes on swift wings for our ill-fated friends. You must choose one. That is how the game goes. He thought this was a game. I was horrified. Was I really supposed to choose who died here and who survived? It was ridiculous, and I went to close the page down. Calmly, the voice began again. Before you close this down, you should know that if you do not choose one of the 3 shown here, your family will be next. I was startled by his declaration, but figured that he was just trying to scare me. He was doing a really good job, truthfully. "Anna," he said. My heart skipped a beat. He said my name. Now I was officially terrified. I just wanted all this to stop. "Anna, dear sweet Anna, I know it's a difficult choice, but must be made. Please, if you will, direct the night watchmen to their door." The original video came back up, and I knew that meant it was time for me to pick someone to die. Maybe it's just a horrible joke that some hacker and his friends like to play on unsuspecting deep web surfers, I stated out loud. It was more to make me feel better than anything, even though my heart was still pounding. I looked at the people again. There was a family there, children. I couldn't choose them. Then there was the expecting couple. I couldn't do this. It was too much. Choose. The normally calm voice barked at me. Choose now. I jumped and looked at the last one. It was of the lonely woman with the dog for a companion. She had the least to lose. She was alone without kids or a husband. It wasn't okay, but I quickly clicked her video. Very well, so shall it be. The voice was calm and smooth once again. The videos of the night watchmen came back up. Night watchman, a choice has been made. You may attend to your work. I watched in horror as 2 of the watchmen began walking towards the houses in front of them. The 3rd one walked away from the house. I was so confused. I chose the lonely woman, but her watchman was walking away. He disappeared into the night, and the feed was cut off. The other 2 videos grew bigger and took up the screen. "What's going on? What's going on?" was all I could say. The 2 watchmen that it showed, each effortlessly broke into the houses. I was biting my bottom lip so hard it bled. The feeds walked along with them as they each silently roamed through the houses. One watchman walked into the set-up baby room and looked around gingerly. Then he made his way across the hall to the other bedroom. The other watchman walked slowly down the hall, seemingly trying to decide which room to enter. He chose the children's room. I looked over to the first one. He stood at the foot of the sleeping couple's bed, holding a huge machete. He walked to one side and began swinging it wildly. There were screams so loud and frightening that I felt like I might pass out and throw up. I looked over to the other video reluctantly. The watchman stood in the children's room, right in the center of the pink bunk bed. He also brandished a machete. I screamed as he raised it up and reached over and pulled the computer plug out of the wall. I was terrified, traumatized. What had I just witnessed? What did I just do? My mouth felt dry, my head was spinning out of control, and my heart felt like it might burst from my chest. After several hours, I decided to check my computer and hope that the nightmare I'd witnessed was gone. There was nothing. Days later, I was checking my email when I stopped and recoiled in horror. There was an email from the night watchman. I finally opened it. I really don't know why. Maybe I was hoping they would tell me I had been punked or something. Instead, it was just a few large words on an otherwise white background. Jenna thanks you for excluding her from a night watchman fate. We thank you for your choices too. We truly enjoyed our encounter with you. Come play again anytime. Attached was a photo of the lonely woman walking her dog in the park, still looking down at her phone. I will never ever access the deep web again. The Girl in the Mirror, a true story, written by BeyondScardDeath. I was about the age of 13 when this story took place. I live in an old house just on the outside of a large city, and it was surrounded by cornfields and forests. I had lived there all of my life before this happened. It was a dreary summer night, which is mostly normal for the place I live. The night went on as usual. I ate dinner, played with my little sister, and did some weightlifting before bed. I got in bed around 7:45. This story will make better sense if I tell you some things about me. I'm a restless sleeper. I toss and turn and get up periodically through the night. And I've always had a fascination with the afterlife. Okay, back to the story. I'm not sure exactly what time I fell asleep, but I didn't really have my usual episodes through the night. This was the first night I slept peacefully in years. I was suddenly woke by the bathroom in my bedroom. Since I had to use the bathroom anyway, I decided to go check it out. I thought it might be a mouse or a bat, since we live in the country and the house is old and has holes in the outer walls. I went in the bathroom. I didn't see anything, so I proceeded on my way to pee. After peeing, I washed my hands and face, and when I was washing my face, I looked up in the large mirror that overhangs my sink. Since there was still water in my eyes, my vision was blurry and I couldn't really see much. But I thought I saw something behind me, but I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I dried my face off and looked up at the mirror again. Right behind me, there was a little girl. She was clutching my body, almost as if she was hiding from something. Her ghostly outline scared me at first, but as I kept looking, I could tell that whatever was scaring her was coming from the basement. So I walked to the basement door and opened it slightly at first because I was very scared of what might be behind it. This being said, I've lived in the house my entire life and have never been in the basement. My dad mentioned to me that it had 3 separate parts, all separated by small windows that you could barely fit through. So I walked down the basement steps and got down to the bottom where the light switch was, and I turned it on. All seemed like it was okay. That's until I heard what sounded like crying from one of the other parts of the basement. In my mind, I was thinking, screw this shit. But in my heart, I knew I had to see what it was. So I ventured through the first part of the basement, and the light couldn't reach the other side where the other room was. It was pitch black. I still heard crying, but since it was so dark, I couldn't see anything. Something gave me the urge to go to the far corner of the room, because the way the moonlight reflected off the floor, you could kind of see with a little light you had. I walked over to the corner and stared directly into the middle of the room. There, in the middle of the room, was a chair. It had shackles for the feet and what looked like to be some kind of restraint for the arms or something like that. That's when I noticed there was someone sitting in that chair. I walked closer, only to reveal that it was the same little girl ghost that had been crying previously in the bathroom. She was also crying there and had needles stuck in her arms. They were draining some type of fluid into her. All was quiet until she started screaming. It was so high-pitched I thought it sounded like a siren, or something of that nature. She was saying words, but I couldn't make out anything she was saying, until she spoke 5 menacing words that made my heart sink. She said, "Get out. Daddy is coming." Not even thinking twice, I sprinted up the basement stairs, tripping over my own feet and fell flat on my face once I reached the top. I got back up and ran to my parents' room. I told them what had happened. They went down there and checked everything out. I told them about the chair and the little girl that was screaming. They told me that there was no chair in the basement and there had never been 3 parts of the basement. Me not believing them, I walked back down there and the room that I saw the chair in wasn't there. There had only ever been 2 parts of the basement, my dad said. I told him what I saw and how I knew there had to be some mistake. But I never did see that part of the basement again. I'm now 18, and I decided to do some research on the house to see if there's any history that could have caused that. I came across an article of a man who had been arrested in 1868 for doing lab experiments on all of his children. After the man was arrested, the police found all 12 skeletons of his children stuffed behind the basement stairs, under debris, and in the concrete. Now that I finally moved out of the house, and that I finally have an answer to what I saw that night, I'm finally at peace. But those 5 words still hang over me to this day. Get out. Daddy is coming. Singing Ghost, written by user originalnilson. First ever post on Reddit. I come from a big family with a Catholic mother and an atheist father. All their kids ended up being agnostic at best. Our house is old, built in the 1920s, and it has a few ghosties in it. A man who my second oldest sister named Lester, and an anxious female ghost, and some dark and primal thing that lives in the garden. Lester liked the bedroom my immediate sister, who is 3 years older than me, and I share. It is a huge high-ceiling room with a wooden floor. It also has a piano in it. This is important because Lester, the old trickster, liked to pace back and forth on the wood floor at night and tinker on the high keys on the piano. Even though I could tell he was nice, it creeped me out and I developed insomnia. So I would stay up late in the TV room watching Star Trek until I was ready to drop and then go to bed. One night, when I was doing this, my sister was in our bedroom practicing on the piano. She told me later that she was playing the same song again and again, but was having a hard time with it. At one point, she gave up and left the room. She walked down the long hallway all the way to the other end of the house to where I was. I just turned off the TV and said to my sister I was going to bed. Now, she didn't say what she had been doing, and as I was at the other end of the house, I couldn't hear her when she was practicing her piano. So I went into the bedroom, got ready, and got into bed. As I developed insomnia over a time, I also developed coping mechanisms to allow myself to get to sleep. One thing I did was always leaving a light on. It was really bright, an uncovered bulb hanging from an old twist of wire from a plaster rose in the center of the ceiling. Even with the light on, it was going to take me a while to get to sleep. Already, the room felt electric, and I could tell Lester was hanging out in there. I took a deep breath and rolled over. Before I could even feel sleepy, I felt like someone was behind me, so I rolled back so I faced the door of the room. No one was there. But there was something that wanted my attention, so I let it sort of steer my vision to where it wanted me to look. I found myself looking at the Beatles poster we had on the wall. I raised my head off the pillow and rested it on an elbow as I stared at it. It seemed strange, like it was light and speckly in my vision. It's hard to describe, really. And as I stared at it, I heard this voice. Now, a human voice is so recognizable that you almost forget what makes it human. The breath in before speaking, the reverberation of the chest, the air pushing past the vocal cords. This voice didn't have that. It sounded like air. Like the air itself had spoke. It rushed and whispered right in my ear. The low and deep breathless timbre of an old man. Blackbird, blackbird. I kid you not, I was upright and out the door, down the hallway and in front of my sister in a matter of seconds. I remember her face as she looked up at me. I must have looked like a ghost myself. She frowned and asked me, "What's wrong?" I heard a voice. It was singing to me. It said, "Blackbird, blackbird," I blurted out. It was my sister's turn to go pale, and she looked shocked. She said to me slowly, "I've been practicing Blackbird by the Beatles for the last hour or two." The Walk, written by Aspiring Waffle. Preface. I am a 23-year-old woman and I'm half Cherokee from Georgia, USA. At the time the story took place, my fiancé and I were living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property and we were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 at the time that this took place, and the only residents in our home were myself, my fiancé, our cat, and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I had rescued because I can't say no to animals that need our help, and our dog was my little pit bull, who is a sweet, cuddly, scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and is afraid of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about a half a mile long. So usually when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk, and usually I brought my fiance with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing games and walking uses his legs. After our driveway was a 12-mile-long road through the woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say that we were far, far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The first mile was through open farmland, followed by a brief patch of forest, and then about a half a mile of wheat fields, and then a solid forest for another 2 miles. Now that you have a bit of a layout, on to the really creepy bit. So it started off like any other weekday evening. My fiance and I returned home from work to our happy little cottage and happy little pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go for a walk, so I quieted her and changed into walking clothes and asked my fiance if he would like to join me. He had gotten home shortly after me and said that he'd seen one of the coyotes that we have around close in the field by our house. But as you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I'm very capable of defending myself. I called him a puss and then told Harley that we could go and then we'd be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking towards the driveway. The sun was going down and the October air had started to get a chill to it, and it rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year and impossible to see through, so I'm assuming that my fiancé was trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in the field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks on our walk up the driveway, and I knew that with as big of a coward as she was, that she would alert me to any danger very quickly by running away from it. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set, and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high above the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of fields. The first field was soybeans, and if you don't know, they are relatively short plants. Nothing but a rabbit could hide in them. And off in the distance, I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I threw a stick and Harley brought it back over and over again. Typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit, and it had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. There was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it probably is what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt down by it and used my knife quickly to put it out of its misery, as my family had taught me, and let it pass into the next life. Feeling sad, but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet, though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat on our left and forest on our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me, and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back towards the forest. Coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack they can get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her heckles, and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! F off!" as loud as I could, and the coyotes startled and scattered off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup, because I'm brave, but I'm not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back, and again I heard rustling in the wheat. A confused coyote? I thought it must be, but no. Harley was standing stock still, staring at the wheat, and I whistled for her to come to me. That high-pitched, ear-piercing, 2-fingered whistle? That snapped her out of it for a second when my whistle was returned from inside the wheat. All of a sudden, all of my family legends I'd heard come flooding back to me, and I expected to see a tall, thin creature emerging, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead, I was transfixed for fear and curiosity. I whistled again. The whistle was returned yet again. Very human sounding, but at the same time not. Against my better judgment, I said, "Hello?" My own voice replied, "Hello?" My hand was on my knife, and I said, "Show yourself." Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no howling noises, just my own breath. Slowly, the rustling started again, and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field, and what I saw confused me to this day. Animal eyes, that green and yellow reflection of light that was cast back to me, but what it was connected to didn't make sense to me. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deer skin or fur skin, and she was naked otherwise. She was very thin and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheat and leaves. Under any other circumstances, I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been for a solid minute or so, but felt like much longer, until I heard unmistakably a coyote howl from the forest. Both of our heads snapped towards the noise, and immediately I heard her take off through the wheat towards the sound. At the same moment, Harley took off towards our house, and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway, and I stopped, not wanting my fiancé to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance, and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and I didn't tell my fiancé about it, not wanting him to go out with a gun. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it was right to hunt her. I was awoken in the middle of the night that night by the sound of coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't unusual, but now I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had stopped obsessing about that night, and I almost thought I had imagined it when I had to slam on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and when my headlights hit its eyes, it reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote. It just stared at my car for a moment and ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. I was stalked while on a hockey trip, written by Lily Draws. I'm a 13-year-old female, and this was only a few months ago when this happened. I was on a hockey trip with the rest of my family. I don't play, but my siblings do. I'm generally a quiet person. I have social anxiety and don't react well to situations with people complimenting me or anything. My family had just pulled into a rest stop I was already familiar with. I was walking in to go get a drink with my little sister who was 9 when she ran ahead of me. I didn't care much, but I wish she had stayed by my side, because not even a few seconds later, a Caucasian man who looked to be in his mid-40s honked his horn at me. I instantly jumped back because I was right next to his car, which was a red 4-door sedan. He started telling me how pretty I was and how I should hop into his car. Being the unsocial person I am, I walked away with no reply. I ran inside to meet up with my little sister. I'm pretty close with her, so I just laughed about what just happened and told her. We didn't think much of it and left as soon as we can. The man made rude gestures at me as I walked back to my other siblings. I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. My brother is pretty intimidating and 16, while my other sister is 15 and not intimidating. They both play hockey and are stronger than I am. My family drove off and started to go to the hotel we were staying at. It was an hour or 2 away, so after a long while we stopped at another rest stop so me and my siblings could stretch. I had already forgotten about the encounter with the man when I noticed a car pull up. It was a red 4-door sedan. I didn't pay that much attention to it at first until I walked into the restroom area. A man followed me in and just sat on the bench like he was waiting for someone. Wanting to avoid eye contact or talking, I pulled my little sister next to me and just spoke about video games with her. I waited until she was done to walk out with her, but Mom walked in and told me to go back to the car. I always avoided talking to strangers, and I get really nervous if someone says hi to me, so I avoid any contact with people. As I was walking back out, the man followed me. He was around the same height as me. I'm 5'8". He walked next to me and whispered in my ear something along the lines, "You would look good tied to my bed." I don't completely remember what he said. I just tensed up and ran for my car, jumping into the back seat. I was scared now. But because I was an idiot, I only texted my friends about it. She told me it was some random creep and not to worry about it. I did as she said and forgot about it. I thought that was it for the encounter. Once my family got to the hotel, we only checked in and went to the ice rink. We took longer than we thought, so we had to be at the rink immediately. I began to forget the man again. It was the start of the second period, and I was sitting outside the actual rink with my sister. I don't bother watching, at least until now. My sister and I were playing some multiplayer game when a man sat right next to me and asked what I was playing. I got extremely uncomfortable and moved away, only to have him move closer again. He began asking me if I had a boyfriend, and I just pointed to my ear to pretend I was deaf. It was pretty stupid looking back on it, but I had a plan if he believed me. I don't know much sign language, but I know enough to pass a lie. Sadly, he didn't buy it and continued to ask. I stayed silent, ignoring him until he put his cold hand on my thigh. I was wearing leggings, so I felt how cold his hand was. I jumped at it, and he, in turn, squeezed it. In the game my sister and I were playing, we could message things, so I quickly looked at her, wrote in the chat of our game, asked me to go to the bathroom with you. She looked at me and realized what was going on. She walked over to me and told me she had to go to the bathroom. We hid in the bathroom for a while until the game was over. I didn't see him until the next game was going, which was the next day. My sister had a fever the day the game was, so I volunteered to stay with her at our hotel. I only really did it to avoid the man again. It was a few minutes later and I heard a knock at the door. At this time, my little sister was downstairs getting breakfast from the hotel. I assumed it was her and opened the door. I hated what I saw instead of my sister. It was the same man as before. I was horrified. His face had a horrible grin on it. Before he could say anything, I slammed the door and decided it was a good time to call the police. I was crying at that point as I sat against the door and called the police. They arrived shortly after, and the man was arrested. It turns out he'd been taking pictures of me the whole trip. He had been following me the whole time, even when I was swimming with my siblings. From then on, I don't ever walk alone. I hate it. I just really freaking hope to never see him again. It was the second scariest thing in my life. A Wendigo broke into my house. Written by Bloodhunter62. Before I begin, I am a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over the summer. We were right outside the D.C. area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So after dinner, we geared up and headed out. We passed under the freeway and headed into the woods. When we got about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and took out the binoculars. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She got tired of them and passed them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald, anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer, and I trained MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say screw that and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and I start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but I try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it gets quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up and then I pass out. My mom wakes me up and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and asked if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found 2 creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or a Wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful the door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing, no matter how tough I am. Never play with a Ouija board, a true story. Written by Celluloidaddiction. This story happened in October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friend and I snuck around the school late at night after our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge narrow tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. There were 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it our school was haunted, but we've never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits come out to play. We all wanted to get really spooked. Also, we've never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house, built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in the section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old Jesuit house. People only go in there when they need to go to the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriends or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of the open space, with only an exposed bare bulb nearby illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios, and it was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend, who brought the Ouija board, proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was a glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious, but it gave us the ability to see what was written in the dark. Not knowing what to do, and going after what we've seen in the movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of the planchette. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "Well, what's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we needed to just throw in a question. "Is anyone there?" I called out into the darkness. "If there are spirits living here, please talk to us," one of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing. Still, nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked if there's anyone here we would like to make contact. "Don't break the circle," one of my friends jokingly said. "Shut up," I whispered. We were just about ready to leave when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. "Okay, don't break the circle," I yelled out. "Is anyone there?" I was excited. It was like a scene from a movie with the dirt and the dead leaves swirling around us. "Guys, I'm scared," my friend sitting beside me said. "My mom warned me about playing with forces we don't know." "Did you die here? Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest that roams the halls? Do you know Jose Rizal, our national hero? Are you a hottie?" my friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random stupid questions. Nothing happened. "This is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore," my friend said, exasperated. We were all thinking the same thing. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain-link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing their teeth. We all screamed and, without finishing the ritual, bolted right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She had gotten home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood. When she realized she'd forgotten the keys to her house, she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said creeped the hell out of her. He swore she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and then she looked really tired, and he saw her head straight to bed. Creepy, but no need to freak ourselves out, was all we thought. Besides, her brother must have been tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling me about an encounter she had Halloween night. She was going up to her room, the light started flickering, and she was ascending the staircase. Your typical horror movie visuals. Shrugged it off to faulty wiring. But then she saw the door to her room open. a dark figure stepped out and stood at the top of the staircase. But she recounted that she couldn't move and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way," my best friend, who just joined the conversation, said in disbelief. "Something happened to me as well." He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static and feeling of heaviness surrounding him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because I had an almost run-in with death that night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board when I felt a car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I found out that we'd been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leapt out of the car. Luckily, my mom and I survived the crash. The front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation why these things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. I never played or got near a Ouija board ever again. The Pesanta, written by Black Cat 1206. Whether this story is 100% true or just another old wives' tale made up by aging family members to scare us kids to behave, it had the desired effect, because even being a modern, streetwise urban kid, I always made sure at least one of us shut and locked all the windows, and when we were very young, left a saucer of milk out in the garden to appease the Pesanta and its dark nocturnal motives. For context, my family are Londoners, born and bred, but we have quite a mixed heritage. My gran was born in Waterford, Ireland, but moved with her family to Paddington, London when she was just 18 months old. Granda is what all the kids called him, was born to a Spanish London father and a mother from Gateshead in the north. In Landbrook Road, before it was a wealthy place, it was a working class area back in the late 20s. When Granda was 4, he went to live with his grandmother and aunties back in Gateshead. His youngest auntie Bella was only 6 months older than Granda, and it was Bella who told us of the story of the Pesanta. By the time I was born, Granda had already passed, but our great-great-auntie Bella outlived him by 18 years, and I remember as a little child listening to Bella's ghouly stories, as she used to say, and being both terrified and mesmerized by her traditional folklore tales that their Catalan-born father told them. There was a story about a family who were terrorized by the Pesanta. It was set as a common cultural belief at the time it supposedly happened, and it was familiar as an urban legend to the kids then as Slender Man is to the kids today. A giant black, hairy dog or cat smelling like sulfur sneaks into the open windows in the depths of night. It terrorizes and harasses the young and the aged of the family, and with the stronger members, it sits on their chest, crushing the oxygen from their lungs as well from their limbs. They also are known to give the victims horrendous night terrors and in general are omens of misfortune or even death. The story goes, on arriving back from a night away from home, he had slept over at a friend's house. 8-year-old Barnaby observed the family house was eerily quiet and still. The front door was still locked, and when he couldn't get an answer, his mother didn't open the door for him. He climbed through his grandmother's open bedroom window. Young Barnaby happened upon a terrible sight. His beloved grandmother was quivering, gibbering, and insensible in the corner of her own room. Horrified, Barnaby ran out screaming, "Mama! Papa!" He ran into his parents' bedroom and immediately began to scream. Hanging halfway off his parents' bed was the lifeless body of his mother. The pallor of her skin was an awful shade of blue. Her lungs had been crushed, it looked like, through an enormous pressure that had been applied to her chest. Barnaby looked around in sheer panic at his baby sister's crib. She was there, of course. Little Layla was lying flat on her back. Her skin the same color as their mother's. She had suffocated to death like someone or something had just sucked the air right out of her. She was only 18 months old. He ran around the house calling out for his father, but his father conspicuously absent. Barnaby then ran to the nearest neighbors to get help. Later on that afternoon, Barnaby's father was found roaming the nearby forest. He was very dazed and confused and just kept repeating 2 words, "La Pesanta, La Pesanta." Not managing to find any more suspects for the 2 murders and not being able to get anything remotely sensible from the only surviving witness to the abominable crime, The police had no choice but to charge the poor father of the family. Nobody wanted to. He had gone totally insane since that afternoon. Instead of jail, he was certified as not being mentally culpable for the murders and put into an asylum for the insane. The same asylum as his mother-in-law was committed to. Young Barnaby was made a ward of the Catholic Church and grew up to become a fine, strong man and even a better priest. He was kind, patient, and noble. In time, he was able to rebuild his life, and if he wasn't able to forget, he was able to move on from that awful morning when he was 8 years old. Only one thing makes him wake up drenched in sweat, crying in the dark. He sometimes dreams of his old family house, and he can see everything as clear as he could that day. But what wakes him up petrified is remembering the foul smell, the unmistakable smell of sulfur. The Grinning Man, a true story. Written by Makkolv at www.thegrinnin.com. My name is Matthew Calamane, and I'm a writer and director of a feature film titled The Grin, a story that is based on true events that actually happened on set where it was filmed, or otherwise known as my house from childhood. I found myself at home one weekend night. My parents were out of town, and I was returning from a canceled sleepover at a friend's house. The lights were on when I got to the door, and I remember getting a phone call from the same friend shortly thereafter, which would end up being the last normal event of the night. My brother was playing video games in the next room, and I could hear him tapping furiously at the video game while I spoke on the cordless phone. I walked around the living room and ended the phone call in the kitchen when I remembered hearing some kind of high-pitched squeal that came from the house somewhere, and I couldn't place where it was coming from as it sounded the same in every room I went to investigate. It ended after about a minute after it started and was interrupted by the phone ringing, but the phone was not in the kitchen where I left it. It was in the bathroom on the counter in front of the sink. I answered the phone and there was nobody there, so I hung up. It was at this point where I heard a dragging sound, like a large heavy object was being dragged in the attic crawl space above me. I followed the sound as it slowly navigated from room to room, and it ended up in my parents' room, who still had a waterbed. After the sound made it to the far wall, it stopped and the phone rang again. This time my friend was on the other end of it. I told him what was going on, and he told me to be careful and call the police. After I got off the phone, I laid down on the waterbed, and I was horrified to find a body-shaped solid object inside the waterbed mattress, and I leaped out of it. I then heard a knock at the door, and answered it quickly, but there was nobody there. It was at this point where my brother called me from his room to check something out that he just discovered in the game he was playing. And a little more than annoyed at his lack of interest in what was going on, I stormed into his room. There was nobody there. His bed was made and the room was spotless. Neither the console nor the TV was on, and the controller was wrapped and unplugged. There was no way he could have hid and cleaned his room in the few seconds it took me to make it from the front door to his room. I had to be alone the entire night, hearing for 20 straight minutes my brother playing a game that he was not present to be playing. The phone rang again, but again it was not where I left it. This time it was resting on the kitchen counter where I originally had left it. So I walked through the entire house to answer it. It was my friend calling again, this time saying that the call was dropped for some reason and he was calling me back. I explained what just happened, and there was another knock at the door. Since I was standing right next to it, I peeked out the window within 2 seconds of the knocks, and there was nobody there. At this point, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch to make sure I didn't see anyone running away, as I had a large, wide open yard, and there was nothing to hide behind. I walked into the yard to look around, but didn't find anything. I found myself engaged in several more minutes of talking before my friend got off the line, and it was at this moment when I realized that the place I'd been staring off into space in while talking, there were two very dark, black, reflective eyes looking back at me. The figure was tall and lanky, and stood 10 feet or so from me in the shadows cast by the front garage from the front door light. The most notable feature he wore was an inhumanly large smile, and he was grinning with oily, metallic teeth from literally ear to ear. Despite me staring directly at him for more than 5 minutes, I pretended I did not notice him, and through willpower alone, made it inside the house without running as fast as I could, and instead walked calmly. I remember feeling like if I ran, he would chase me, and somehow I knew that he would have caught me easily. barricaded myself in my room for the rest of the night and did not fall asleep until the sun came up the next morning and my parents were finally home. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and nothing like that has happened to me since. The Stalker, written by BubblesBuss. I was 16 and me and my friends, I'll call them Evan and Jake, wanted to rent a hotel for the night since it was spring break. We got to the hotel and checked in. It had a really funky smell, but we still stayed there. Once we got to our room, it was about 3 p.m., so we decided to go swimming. The pool was in the downstairs part of the hotel. Once we got to the entrance, there was a man at least 6'3" in all black with a hood covering his face facing us. I panicked a little, but not out loud. We got around him and we got into the pool and swam for a few hours until we saw the man again. All black, sitting on the chair by the pool. I cleared my throat. Can I help you, sir? I asked. No response. I still was a little paranoid, so I put my face in the water, and at the bottom of the pool was another figure that was dressed all in black. I screamed like a little girl and ran for the door. I looked back and saw nothing. Not the guy in the chair or the guy in the pool. My friends thought I was just seeing things, but I saw what I saw crystal clear. I didn't feel like swimming anymore, so I decided to get dinner at a nearby restaurant. I got a table for me and my friends, and there I saw once again the man in all black on the other side of the dining room, and he was staring at me. I had enough at this point. I went over there, and I lost track of him, and he took off. After that, I decided that this trip had gone too far, and we should leave tomorrow morning, but my friends didn't really like that idea. Once it was 10:30, my friends and I dozed off in the hotel room. I woke up to some noises. I saw a shadow of a figure at the end of my bed. I tried to calm myself down and told myself that it was just my hat that I'd put there before I went to bed. I went back to sleep, but then I got woken up again 30 minutes later to more noises. I was getting thirsty, so I reached under the bed and tried to grab my water bottle, but I grabbed something else, and I was totally shocked by what I grabbed. It was my hat. I couldn't help but scream at the top of my lungs when I heard a voice next to my ear. "You're a little bitch." I jumped out of bed and realized it was 2 men in black right there. I tried to fight them, but it was no use. Once they grabbed me and dragged me out of that room, I tried to scream, but one of the guys covered my mouth. I passed out. I woke up on a stretcher in the hospital. It turned out one of these guys knifed me while I was passed out, and someone caught him. But the doctor and the policeman said no one could catch these guys who had gotten me. To this day, I always have a nightlight in my room so I'm not so scared. The Big Game Hunter, written by Boyd S. My family, mainly my dad, has always believed in the supernatural or paranormal. While growing up, my father always told me that I was more spiritually connected than others, though I never really believed him. That is, until he told me this story that has made me believe in spirits ever since. When I was about 2 years old, I had an imaginary friend. His name was Barrington. He was a big game hunter. I'd come up to my parents and tell them that I just talked to Barrington, and he had told me about this animal that is native to Africa. I can't exactly remember what the animal was. I think it was some kind of gazelle, but my parents just laughed at the name because they've never heard of anything like it. But on the off chance that this was real, my dad decided to look it up, and guess what? The photo of a gazelle popped up right in his face. My parents were blown away, wondering how their 2-year-old son had come up with this real animal that they had never heard of. Then it hit my dad. He wondered if my so-called imaginary friend was actually a spirit of some sort. So naturally, he checked the house's previous owners, and you wouldn't believe it. There was a man named Barrington who owned the house before us, and yes, was a hunter of big game around the world and was well known for this hobby of his. After hearing this story, I've run through so many possibilities. I just can't understand how when I was 2 years old, I had come up with some sort of animal that my parents had never heard of. I really do believe that I talked to Barrington's spirit. Call me crazy, and now I truly believe that spirits are real. The The Cottage in the Woods, written by lowly-bumbo. Now this isn't a scary story, but more of a creepy one. My friend's dad's family used to live in the woods near Eureka Springs, Arkansas. My friend's uncle was the oldest of 3 kids, and was allowed to explore the woods on his own, even though he was only about 9 years old. One day, he came across a little cottage nestled in the woods. He knocked on the door and was greeted by 2 old ladies. He promptly asked for some water, as he had been exploring for hours. The ladies invited him in and gave him milk and cookies and sat down and talked with him while he petted their white cat. They talked for a while and they eventually invited him to stay for dinner and spend the night. Because it was getting so dark and he was away from home, his parents were pretty used to him being in the woods for nights without coming back, so he accepted without question. He spent the night without incident and returned home the next morning. He visited many more times over the next year, and one day they told him to bring his parents and his brothers the next time he came. So the next week, the whole family embarked on the long trek to the cottage. When they arrived, however, they found the remains of a small cottage. It appeared to have been abandoned for years. Everyone was very confused, as they all trusted that my friend's uncle had visited the women many times. They had absolutely no idea what had happened, or if my friend's uncle had actually been visiting anybody. To make things even weirder, as they were leaving, an old, skinny, white cat ran past them, darting into the trees, leaving them in utter shock. I hope you all enjoyed all of our haunted tales this evening. Join our community on our Facebook group page and YouTube channel. If you have a haunting story of your own or artwork and you want to submit it for consideration for the future show, drop me a line on our Reddit page or email address. All our links are below in the description. Special thanks to Darken Mood, Darken_M00D, for all his wonderful art that you can check out on his Reddit page. I want to thank all our brave storytellers, for without them there would be no show. A detailed list of story credits are in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to listen to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams. Okay, guys, that is the show for this evening. Like I said, I felt like some really good stories tonight. I've already picked out some for next week, so look forward to that for next Sunday at 7. If you want to, hit me up. Let me know what was your favorite story tonight, or what kind of stories do you find the most interesting, and I'll try to find something like that. Also, don't be a stranger. Send me a message on through our Haunted Tales members page over there on Facebook. And make sure that you go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe, because I always put all our podcasts over there. I like to start posting videos again, but we're just trying to see the flow of things with my son in school. Hopefully we'll be getting back to that soon. It may take a little bit until I can get an actual computer for myself, but, we're going to try to figure out something for that. Alright, guys, well, thank you for spending your time this evening with me. An hour didn't seem long enough. It seemed like it went by too fast, but I'll see you next week. And again, thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.